Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Dynamo sessions. Just a recap about what we did last time. We presented a course, Dynamo from Zero to Hero, and it was just to introduce the basics of Dynamo and what Dynamo could do and how could you use it in your semester projects. And
make sure to go back and watch these recordings
Yeah.
because there's scripts that everyone here at Care, our school, is going to use because it's just made specifically for that. So make sure to go back and catch up on this.
Yes, and they're all recorded on YouTube, so we will share the link to that at the end when we reach the Q&A. But for today, we are going back with the Dynamo Tuesdays, which we had from last semester. And the idea of Dynamo Tuesdays is just to use some time to explain some scripts that we could also use, but it's a bit more complex than what we had at the beginning, and it of course gets more exciting as well.
Also, a lot more potential. Like what we're showing now can automate so many of the tasks that we're doing on a regular day basis.
Yeah, especially with Excel. So the idea of today is to introduce a new series about Excel and how to use data from Excel and put that into Revit using.
Yeah, because we're essentially doing in Dynamo, our most important tool is lists. And here we've got a program that is made for making lists. So it just makes our life a lot better and a lot easier.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so for us to use Excel in Dynamo, of course, we had to come up with an idea. And the idea of today's session is to use a QTO Excel sheet. As you can see on the screen, this is just a quantity takeoff Excel sheet example. And if you're not aware of what a quantity takeoff is, it's usually a document that you have to prepare in your process and planning subject. And what it basically has is all your elements in Revit. And with those elements, you have to match them with SFP codes or just different code standards. There's a lot of different codes, but the whole concept stays the same because for now we are using SFP codes, but it of course can change.
There's a lot of fancy codes and whatever you can use. You can use BIM7AA or you can use CCS codes. They're basically the same. You just want to take this code and apply it into Revit and make a program or automate this process.
So the idea is to use something that we always have in our semester, which is, for example, this quantity takeoff, and present something like this. And right now, if I can zoom in a little bit to show you what there is on this floor plan, this is just an example of a floor plan that you can produce during your regulatory project stage. And if you have a closer look on the doors and the interior walls, for example, they are tagged by SFP codes. And of course, there's a bunch of different ways to tag different things. It could be by instance, it could be by so many different ways, but
that's not really what we're doing here today. Today, we are trying to prepare these tags and make them just applicable by what it is that we're doing.
Exactly. And to use something that we have already and apply that into Revit to make our model smarter and to make everything much more better in terms of communication as well. And then in the end, you can just have a legend for yourself to just showcase what each SFP code stands for which element. And yeah, but that's not what we're going to do. What we're going to do is to prepare these SFP codes and place them into our Revit elements using a Dynamo. So we always like to break things down into smaller steps to make it easier. As much complex as it might sound, it's actually not that complex. So the idea is to divide it into 3 different scripts. The first script that we are going to do is to create a type parameter for this SFP codes. In order for us to add all of these codes, we need a new parameter, of course, and that's what we're going to do.
And this script here is not really only applying doing here by applying the SFP codes. This can all the parameters you ever want to apply to an element in Revit, or a family or a type.
Exactly. So you can always end up with like a big list of parameters at the beginning of your project and then shoot that script and it creates them all for you.
It's for everything. It's so nice.
Exactly. And then the second part would be to export all the door types that we have from Revit into Excel. And that Excel would be our quantity takeoff that I just showed you, in order for us then to use that data that we have in our Revit project and match it with the SFP codes, and then use another script to set all of these SFP codes into our elements. For today, we are using doors as an example. Of course, this can be much, much more powerful if you do doors, windows, walls, and everything else.
And this is essentially as well, you can make these lists. So as long as you work with as many different types as you want, we're just, doors is what we're.
But it's much more fun if we don't give you the last solution because then you can also experiment with your own self and try things out, and it becomes much more fun in the end. So we are doing doors today as an example. And in order for us to simplify it even more, we are doing it with 2 sessions. So today's session is going to be with the first script, which is the parameters, and then the second one is to export everything into Excel. Then on the 17th of November, we will continue with a little bit of manual work. I wouldn't say it's a lot of work, but it's just a tiny bit. And then we will move on to the script.
And the last script here is really cool. We apply what we've also talked about in From Zero to Hero, where we filter and sort and match things up. It's a cool script. I'm looking forward to that.
Yes, definitely. Okay, so enough talking, and we can start with some Dynamo scripting. And I will just, before we start, maybe I should just show you a little bit the example that we have for today, the sample file. It is very random, of course. It is just used to experiment with everything. And because we are doing doors, we tried to add some doors to showcase the whole thing.
There's a lot of different types and a lot of different instances that these have been made for. So
exactly. Yeah. Okay, so let's start. And I will create a new Dynamo workspace. So as we said, the first step is to create a parameter. And our parameter is a project parameter, of course. So let's start by typing in project parameter. And my keyboard is caps lock. So sometimes when you write things, try to not space them out, because if you see the way I spaced it out and then when I remove the space, I get different results. So for today, we are using create project parameter, this node. And what this node is basically doing is it comes up with all the settings that you would usually get when you create your project parameter inside of Revit. It's exactly the same thing. It's just in a different visual way, and it's doing the same process. So we can start with one by one, trying to input everything together and then run our list in the end. Of course, if yours is set to automatic, make sure you change it to manual so that we can run it in the end together. And before I run this, I also want to show you my existing project parameters, just to make sure that we don't have any parameter that is called SFB codes. So you can see in the end, after we run the script, it should show up here as a result. So let's start with the parameter name, and that's quite simple. What we do, as Alex explained in the last session about code blocks, we double click in our workspace to get a code block. And then in order to write a string, you have to use quotations, and we will name it SFB codes. So I will just write SFB codes or code, and then close the quotation and then click somewhere out in space. And then you can connect this input to your first parameter name. Now, also a good idea is to hover over each of these inputs and try to read what it says, because this gives you a good hint of what this node is expecting. So the second input is group name. And if you read group of the parameter for shared parameters, we don't have a shared parameter right now, so we don't have to worry about that. So I will also double click to get a code block again, and I will do 2 quotations inside of my code blocks. And what this means basically is just to give this input something to input as, but it's empty. So there's nothing inside of my quotation. Nothing is going to happen. It will not affect anything. So the whole idea of this is to just have an input over here. Now it gets a bit more interesting because we go to parameter type. And one way of trying to fill in your nodes is to try to look for those inputs that you have, because sometimes you will find something in the search, sometimes you will not. But let's try to search for parameter type because that's what it's expecting. And let's see what we get over here. And that's actually a good way of understanding what does a parameter type mean, because sometimes you're like, okay, what does a parameter type mean? What am I supposed to put here as an input?
It's also a good way of learning your node library, what the different things are doing.
Yeah. So when I searched for it, I could see that I have a packaged node from Archilab that's called parameter types. And as we mentioned before, we try our best not to use packaged nodes, but let's have a look at it and let's see what it says as parameter types so that we could try to use another way, which is a default way, rather than using this one. So I could see that if I scroll down, it gives me all the different types that I can choose. For now, I want text. So if I click on text, this is all what this input is requiring. It's just requiring something that says text. So for me, instead of using this packaged node, I could just double click again to get a code block and use quotations and type in text exactly as what this node is doing. And then I can delete it and not use it. And then my this part would be also a default part, not a packaged part. The same thing happens with parameter group. So we could look that up here and see what that gives us. And then another package node from Archilab. And let's have a look at this. This one is a bit more interesting because notice that all of these types, or sorry, all of these groups start with G, and then they have some underscore in between. And PG stands for parameter groups. Makes sense, of course. And if you're wondering why it's written in caps lock, and if you're wondering why it always starts with PG, this is because this is how it is in the Revit API. So this is how Dynamo expects it to be placed as an input here. So that's how, if we want to choose any of these groups, we have to try to type it in the same way that Revit, that the Revit API has it as. So I want my parameter group to be identity data. So if I start to look into that and see where it is, it's over here. And I'll just put it onto the side and double click again to get a code block. And I'm going to write in the same exact thing. So caps lock on, and then PG underscore identity underscore again data. And then close your quotations, of course. Make sure your spelling is correct, because if it's not, then you will get a warning. And
a lot of this can be quite difficult to understand, Nuhad, right? When you're saying, oh, PG, why is this like it is? But if you actually just Google trying to get the parameter group, when you see something like this in a node and you don't really know what it is, and you don't have a package node that explains it so well to you, if you Google it, you will find all the data you need for what is the different parameter groups.
Yeah. And of course, I also initially didn't know about it until I researched about it. And Google is it should be your best friend, and it always gives you something, maybe not the best solution, but it will always give you a hint.
It'll give you a hint, and then you can work it out from there.
Exactly. So that's the whole thing. You have it ready as a solution from this session, but maybe you might not have it for other options, but that's just one way to do it. So I'm just going to get rid of my packaged node because now I have it as a code block, and I will also input that here. And now I am left with instance. And this basically means, do I want my parameter to be an instance parameter or a type parameter? Of course, I will not explain the difference between these two because that's basics of Revit. But what this node is expecting is a Boolean from what you can read here. So I need to true or false. Is it an instance? That would be true. Is it a type? That would be false. So then it's not an instance anymore. So let's look for a Boolean node. And I don't want, so if it's true, then it's an instance. I don't want it to be an instance, so I will just put it as false. So that's here. Now the last part is the category list. And the category list is, if I go back to the drawing that I showed you before, it is basically just the different Revit categories that you want this SFP code to apply to. Right now, I only have doors because that's the example that we're presenting. But you can, of course, choose walls, you can choose windows, you can choose specific families, you can choose so many different things. But for today, we are just going to use the doors as our category so that it applies this parameter to this category. So in order to get a category, just look it up as well as a node because it's straightforward from here. And then I will just click D and then scroll a bit down to get as my last input. Before I input that, if you were there in the previous session, notice how the appearance of my node will change from light gray into dark gray at the top, and that means that all your inputs are complete and you are ready to run. So let's run. It should be really fast, very fast because it's just a short script. And I will minimize and go to my project parameters and see that I have a new parameter called SFB code. And to be more specific and to be much more sure that it's applied to doors, I can just go to one of my doors and go to edit type and then just scroll down under identity data. And then I find my SFB code parameter here. And this is what I meant by identity data. This was the category or the group that we chose in the script, right? So right now the parameter is of course empty because we don't have any inputs yet, but this comes later where we will use Excel to place some data here and then tag things with this parameter. So that's the first part, which is to create the parameter. Now we move to the second part, which is to export everything into Excel.
And I am just going to share my screen here. So now we've got the parameters made and everything, but we need our types to actually know what we're doing here.
Yeah.
So I have here the quantity takeoff Excel sheet, and what we want over here is the door types. So what we're going to do is that we're going to export the data from Revit into into Dynamo and take it out into Excel. So we want the type data for each door and basically have that into our Excel sheet. So what we're going to start with is that we're going to start by finding the category of doors. So I'm going to write categories, and you know this one, we've used it quite a lot. We're looking for doors, exact same as Nuha did just before. And then we want all of our elements of these. So because right now you see it, it's just called it's just called doors, and that's not really giving us anything to work with.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to write all elements.
Just use some space beside all, and then that's how it is. But then it's
all elements of category. Down here it expects a category. I'm giving it a category, and now you can see that I have a lot of doors. They're not really listed. They're not really sorted by how we want them, right? So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to quickly have a peek, is that I'm going to get my parameters by name. So I want get parameter.
It's without a space actually. So, but yeah. Is it this one?
Nope, it's not. I'm doing
it's
it
get.
wrong.
It's
get parameter value by name. Element get parameter.
It's the last one. Yeah.
Exactly. There you go. That you just see how well it is to organize it.
Yeah.
And what I want here is to actually know the type of what I'm doing. So I'm going to click in a node block like we talked in from 0 to hero, again, quotation mark, and then just write type because that's the info I need or want. And then I can essentially filter this list here I have by the type names of it. And here you see that I just get out the type single flush and the
so this gives you the data or the type of each of these doors.
Yep, exactly.
But of course, it's still random. So you see a way to organize this and to organize it by type.
Yeah.
That's where it gets interesting.
And here I want to group them by a key, and the key is exactly like you just said.
Yeah, a key is basically, meanwhile, while you type it, a key is basically something that is unique. And you can use a key or something that is unique in order to organize your list. So if we have our types, which are unique elements, they are always different, we can organize our existing door lists by those types. And then we get them very well organized that way.
So I take my my elements here and plug it into my list group by key, because like Nuha just said, it'll sort it by this. And then I give it my variables here and press run. This should then give me all the different types of doors organized by how many there is and how many they are. But this is, again, exactly not the data that I'm looking for. I'm looking for just the lovely thing about this list group by key is that it gives me a list here in the end by what the different types are.
Yeah, so in the end, you can see that you only have 4 different types in your Revit project, and that's exactly what you need later in your script.
Then I'm going to go up to, sorry, I'm quick peeking again.
No.
Now we get to the exciting part, really, where we can get our Excel and specify this.
Yeah.
So I want to export this data, right? So I click the export data Excel node and then see what it is that I'm required here. Like we just showed you here, this sheet is quantity takeoff and it's sheet 1, so I can see that this is what I need. You see, it expects a file path here in the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for a file path.
And that's the file path of your Excel sheet. So you specify where is your Excel sheet so that Dynamo can read that data from there.
There's a bit of difference in about this when you're actually going to do it. Some nodes require a file path and some nodes require a file from path.
Yeah.
You're just going to have to figure that out when you're doing it.
For now, it's just
for now, it's just a file path. Then I click browse on it, open up. I get my quantity takeoff, the same Excel sheet that is here.
Yeah.
Press it. I just need to close it down here first.
Yeah.
And then I've got my Excel sheet. That's my file path. Then I can click a node plugin, and the sheet name was, like we just saw before, sheet 1.
Yeah. Of course, you can always name your sheets and call them quantity takeoff or whatever, but for now it was sheet 1.
Doors or whatever, yeah. And then we've got the start rows and the start columns. And this is where Dynamo will start to input the data that we've just gotten from it. So this one, I'm just going to ask it to start at row 1, I believe it is.
Yeah, maybe let's open the Excel sheet and try to see what row 1 is and what everything is so that we can understand it much better. So if you open that up, then you will see that we, in the end, we added 2 extra columns for us to export the data.
Yes.
And to match our data.
Yeah.
So
So the door type is where I want my 4 different door types to be, and this I'm just quickly going to count. And this is column 16.
Yeah.
And I want it to start at the first spot here. So this the node that we're using does really just count them 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 16. Yeah. So this is what I want, right? I am just quickly gonna put in 1 and then also 16. Then the start row and my start column. Now I'm just quickly going to look at my prepared to make sure that this is correct. And I can see that it actually is not. No, it is right. It's just me who's done it wrong. Then the data is exactly what we've got here. I want my data for my my doors to be here. And that's what we're going to write into the Excel sheet. So I take my unique keys, press it into the data, and press run.
And now go to your Excel sheet, and you'll see that it's exported there.
Here is all of my different types. You can see this is quite a long name. I think we can do this just a wee bit better. We've also got the element by name, where we only get the type name. This is a lot easier to write and read in an Excel sheet instead of having it like this. So I'm going to type element name.
Yeah, instead of writing in or exporting the data as it is in